care. Obviously, ambulatory care is a big topic, so I've narrowed to sort of our huge 3 topics in ambulatory care. So diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. Obviously, that's not the only thing that we do in ambulatory care. I could go on for days and days and days about interactions in this huge broad topic, but wanted to move down to 3 because these are the kind of big 3 that your book hits on. But what I also wanted to note was what I'm not covering, and I'm specifically not covering some things that are important, and I don't want you to get the sense that it's not important because I'm not covering it today. So what we're hitting today are the big highlights, which is what your book does, right? Your book is the top 100 drug interactions, so clearly it's not covering the thousands of drug interactions that occur. So I want you to note, though, some pretty big things that we deal with in ambulatory care that I am not going to cover. So the first one is statin dose adjustments for different drugs. So a lot of times we'll have a maximum dose of simvastatin, especially per XYZ drug. So be aware that a lot of times, and these come up on your drug interaction checkers all the time, especially if you're in, I guess, really any setting, because they come up on the inpatient side, they come up in my AmCare EMR when I write scripts, and they also come up in the community pharmacy realm. I know that because they send us hate mail all the time about how we are having too high doses of amlodipine and simvastatin together. So realize that I'm not going to cover that, but as an important aspect when you're thinking about especially statin therapy. And then the other thing that has kind of fallen out of favor in AmCare, we don't use as much as fibrates. We still do for high triglycerides, but we don't, because of guideline changes, use them as much for hyperlipidemia. So I chose to leave them out of today's discussion so that we can have more time to highlight things that are the extremes. So just be aware that those are sort of 2 big areas in ambulatory care. I'm not going to go into huge depth about them, but they are very important. So for our objectives for today, they're the same as they have been for the entire semester, which is that we're going to go over drug interactions. We're going to focus on ambulatory care topics. The 3 that I picked were diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia, because those are the 3 that were highlighted the most in your book. We're going to talk about counseling patients through drug interactions. So this is an important piece and an easy piece that we can slip in sort of any setting that we're in. Is, you know, in a community setting, we can give that 2-second spiel. In care setting, I spend the majority of my time on through drug interactions when I'm in clinic with patients. And then finally talk about some drug disease state. Again, very useful no matter what setting you're in. All right, so as I already mentioned, we're going to do diabetes, hypertension, and dyslipidemia. I put a little summary together here of some of the major topics. You'll see that our diabetes and our hypertension we're going to spend the most time on, and dyslipidemia we're going to spend the least time on. And let me be very clear that it's not because our lipid medications do not have interactions. They absolutely do, and we absolutely do have to dose adjust, and we absolutely do have to pick our drug therapy for our lipid agents. It is that they are very specific, and we are not going into specific details about every single drug interaction that ever existed. So they are there, they are important, but we're not going to cover them. What I want you to be responsible for, in particular for dyslipidemia, is the enzymes, and we'll get there. All right, so let's plunge into diabetes. Y'all know this is my wheelhouse, so of course this is where I'm going to have the most fun. Drug-drug interactions. This is what I typically think of when I prescribe any medication for diabetes with any other medication is what is my risk for hypoglycemia with the diabetes drug and the drug that I'm going to prescribe. And that's for a few different reasons. Sometimes it's because a drug makes you not want to eat. Sometimes it's because a drug makes you nauseous. Sometimes it's because it can cause hypoglycemia. So for this particular example, when we have TZDs, especially pioglitazone, and we combine them with clopidogrel and or gemfibrozil, then it can lead to hypoglycemia. So hypoglycemia could be an effect of your drug, but it's one of the biggest risks that comes up when I'm thinking about diabetes, okay? So in general, diabetes drugs don't have blood-drug interaction, but I worry about hypoglycemia no matter what I'm giving, but especially when you do this combination with TZDs, clopidogrel, dantrolene. Either, it's an either or an and, I guess if you had a patient that was on all three. So in particular with pioglitazone, we limit the dose in this case, so it's dose limited to 15 milligrams. So you don't want to go above 15 milligrams of pioglitazone in patients who are on concomitant clopidogrel and dantrolene. Here's another thing to note for this particular interaction is that these are common medications that are prescribed in conjunction with each other. So it's not, well, hopefully it's becoming more uncommon because we don't use TZDs as much. But you will see combinations of TZDs with these agents because they're disease states that flow in and out of each other, right? We use clopidogrel for atherosclerotic disease. You get atherosclerotic disease because you have diabetes. So these are commonly used together, although TZDs are fading. So hopefully you'll see less and less of this drug interaction because we don't use TZDs as much. Good? Next kind of section is hypoglycemia. As I mentioned before, I really worry about hypoglycemia with any diabetes drug. In particular, it depends on what enzymes those drugs go through and the drug interactions that are associated with those drugs and those enzymes. So when we think about pioglitazone, we think about PGP, we think about 3A4 and 2C8. So if you have drugs that are PGP, 3A4, 2C8, then that's where we're going to have that situation where we have drug interactions. So it's kind of like, I know my patients on pioglitazone, let me think about the other drugs and what enzymes they go through. Does that make sense? Same for DPP4s. So DPP4s and pioglitazone typically go through the same enzymes. So that's also something to note. We can use those in combination with each other, technically, right? Although also fading, right? We typically don't use pioglitazone that much anymore. We're starting to use less and less DPP4s. So if you have them all in combination together, though, if you have a pioglitazone and a DPP4 and more drugs that are interacting, that's where we really start to worry about that risk for hypoglycemia. Okay. So this is usually a combination thing, but can happen with particular drugs. So when I mentioned PGP and I mentioned 3A4, and we think back to our last lecture, and we think about our big bold blue drugs. So our big bold blue drugs from our previous lecture, those are the same drugs. It's not like PGP magically changed. It's not like CYP3A4 magically changed. They all go through that pathway. So I would hold you accountable that if I put pioglitazone on the exam or I put a DPP4 on the exam and I give you one of those big bold blues that I gave you in the last lecture in PGP and 3A4, that you will recognize that those are drug interactions. Okay? So our CYP3A4 and our PGP big bold blues from my previous lecture hold true for this lecture as well. I'm just not restating them on the slide for you. Is that clear? So big bold blues from last lecture are the same big bold blues for this lecture. So anywhere you see PGP or 3A4, plug in those big bold blues. And I'm going to hold you accountable for those. Okay? Our sulfonylureas go through CYP2C9. So CYP2C9 drug interactions with sulfonylureas would be something to watch. All right? Questions about what I've covered so far, kind of enzymes and risk for hypoglycemia and specific agents related to hypoglycemia, and we have similar pathways. Drug interactions, it's a lot about the enzyme game. Which enzyme are they going through? And if they're going through the same enzymes, then we're going to interact with each other. So we have to be careful about overwhelming those enzyme pathways. Okay, so it's a perfect example. We do have to be careful. We have drugs in the same class that go through, or drugs in the same that treat the same disease state, like we do in this case, where we have P-glucosanes or DPP4s. They go through the same enzymes already, and then make sure we're not adding on to that. Okay. All right. So we worry about hypoglycemia, but then we can also, for beta blockers specifically, worry about hypoglycemia unawareness. So can somebody describe to me what hypoglycemia unawareness is? What does that mean, that term? How about somebody in Athens? If you had to take a guess about hypoglycemia unawareness, what does it sound like?
Your symptoms are masked?
Very good, yeah. And why would your symptoms be masked by beta blocker? What about what qualities or properties of a beta blocker make it be masked? How about that? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Didn't mean to cut somebody off. If you were confident, you go for it. I'm all about it. All right, they got shot. Augusta, tell me what's the property of beta blocker that masks hypoglycemia? How are those two related to each other?
It controls your heart rate. So normally when your blood sugar goes low, your heart rate will go up, but the beta blocker will prevent that from happening.
Exactly, perfect description. Yeah, so when we have hypoglycemia, we have our fight or flight response that happens, but beta blockers naturally counteract that fight or flight. So if we have a beta blocker on board, but we are blocking that fight or flight, then we're going to block those typical symptoms of hypoglycemia. However, there's one symptom that still occurs. Somebody in Albany, can you tell me what that one symptom is?
Is it sweating?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So we still have sweating in our patients, even if they're on beta blockers. So it's really, really important when we have patients who are on beta blockers and they are at risk for hypoglycemia that we make sure that they know to look for that sweating. And it's not sweating like I just ran outside in 100-degree weather, now I'm sweating. No, like you expect to sweat then. It's when you're just sitting in normal setting and all of a sudden you start sweating. Kind of like that hot flash, it just comes out of nowhere and you just profusely sweat. Okay? That's a difficult symptom to catch, but it's the one that we can still have. Any questions about that? Unlike some settings where some beta blockers are better than other beta blockers, this is one where it's kind of universal. There's definitely differences between beta blockers in terms of this, but it's the overall beta blocker effect that kind of occurs here. So I've really seen it with all beta blockers, both selective and non-selective. There's some difference, but in general, I counsel on all beta blockers in this particular setting. Okay? All right. Next, we'll move on to some sulfonylureas. And what's interesting about sulfonylureas is that they, for absorption purposes, require a particular pH in the GI tract. So most of the time, we think about changes in pH of the GI tract causing less absorption or less of an effect. But in this case, with sulfonylurea and changes in pH, Drew, you lost your mind. Recover. So with sulfonylureas, if you have a change in the pH caused by antacid, PPIs, H2 blockers, so since they're all changing the gastric pH, then you're going to have an interaction there, and it's actually an increased absorption of sulfonylureas. They'll have more of an effect, so for more risk for hypoglycemia. Because normally we think maybe you have less absorption, you actually have more absorption in this case, better absorption of your sulfonylurea than you normally have, which is not necessarily a good thing because then you have hypoglycemia. So if you had to guess how you would get around this drug interaction, what would be your guess?
Space out when you take them.
Fabulous. And how much are you going to space by?
2 hours before or 6 hours after?
Yeah, the classic rule, 2 hours before, I'd say 4 hours after, but you find it 6. The classic, right? 2 hours before, 4 hours after. You wanna say 6, I'm okay with that. It's that classic recommendation, so separate. That gives your time, your GI time to recover at least some degree. Obviously that changes drug to drug, right? So our PPI is a more 24-hour drug, so we might have more of an interaction with the PPI because we're consistently changing the GI tract as opposed to something like an antacid where it's a more transient sugar half-life. Okay. Good. All right, our next one is with metformin. Metformin specifically with contrast media. So we have contrast media. Contrast media causes, what does contrast media cause? What's the side effect of contrast media? Do you know this? Related to kidneys? Is that the top? I mean, something happens. Nephropathy, good. So what happens when you have nephropathy in the setting of metformin? Go ahead, Summer. Oh, the other pathway. What's the adverse effect that we're worried about? Okay, good. So you get acute kidney failure, acute kidney injury, right? And then in metformin, what's the problem with metformin and acute kidney injury? What's the end goal? Bad effect. Good. And what do elevated levels of metformin cause? No? Negative. Maybe you guys don't know this one. Okay, gotta teach you something today. Lactic acidosis. We didn't know this. Did we know it? We didn't know it? Lactic acidosis. Yeah, I get some like, good. Okay, lactic acidosis. This is a huge one. Huge. This is the same mechanism of what, okay, now I'm gonna get on my soapbox. This drives me nuts. Metformin and lactic acidosis. So this is the same reason that we don't use metformin when we have an eGFR of less than 30. This is why we dose adjust metformin for CKD patients, is because of the risk for lactic acidosis. So you get too much metformin in your system, we have too much metformin in the system, and the outcome is lactic acidosis. All right? What metformin does not cause is kidney injury. So don't get this confused to say that metformin causes AKI, because metformin does not cause AKI. It's one of my pet peeves. Patients tell me all that all the time. My nurse practitioners tell me that like every day. I'm like, they'll come in and say, look at this patient's CKD is getting worse, it's because of the metformin. No, metformin absolutely does not cause renal injury. Liver injury, yes, but kidney injury, no. But in the setting of a patient who has kidney injury, then you don't clear the metformin. If you don't clear the metformin, then you get elevated levels of metformin, and then you have risk for lactic acidosis. Okay? The one thing that can cause kidney injury, acute kidney injury, is contrast media. So that's the idea, that's the principle behind this particular drug interaction. But I'm about to put a caveat on it. And the caveat is that this used to be a total contraindication, where we used to stop metformin 48 hours, typically, variable, but 48 hours roughly, before you got media, contrast media. They would stop metformin, they would do the scan, and then you could start back after they make sure your kidneys are functioning appropriately. But that recommendation has changed over time, and it's kind of one of our clinical controversies. So now, if we have a patient who has normal renal function, we may actually continue metformin despite having contrast media. That's also dose dependent on the contrast media and the metformin. Let's do the whole thing again. All right, so we're gonna go through this whole thing again. So we have contrast media, causes renal injury. You have renal injury, you have too much metformin. If you have too much metformin, you get lactic acidosis. Okay? So So that's the pathway that occurs, that's what we're worried about, that's where this is, used to be contraindicated. Which means we used to not do metformin in contrast media at all. What we used to do in the past is stop it roughly 48 hours before they were to get the contrast media. So they would stop their metformin for 2 days, then they would have their scan. But newer research, new kind of clinical controversy now, is to actually continue metformin in patients who have normal renal function and patients who are getting low dose contrast media. The normal renal function, low dose contrast media, and especially in patients who also have low dose metformin. So those are your 3 deciding factors. What is the dose of their metformin? What is the dose of the contrast media? And what is the patient's renal function? So if they have low contrast media, they have a low metformin dose, and they have good renal function, continue as normal. And it is some combination, depends patient to patient. Depends institution to institution. I'm not going to nitpick and be like, this patient's eGFR is 59, and they're getting a contrast dose. No, it's just want you to know the general idea. Okay? It should throw up red flags to you, in other words. If you have a patient about to go get scanned and they have diabetes, typically we start metformin anyway, right? Most of the time when you're getting scanned, you're heading towards the inpatient side anyway, and we're stopping metformin regardless because of all the kidney stuff that happens when you go inpatient. So typically this isn't that big of a deal. It's more in an outpatient type setting where we're worried about this when I'm outpatient setting them for a scan. Questions about this concept? Good. All right, so those are all of our drug-drug interactions for diabetes that I wanted to cover. Clearly didn't cover every drug-drug interaction, but when I hit on some of the highlights, the ones that I'm most worried about, and the ones that affect me on kind of a day-to-day basis in the clinic. Next, we're going to talk about drug-food interactions. And drug-food interactions really have to do with the absorption of the absorption of glucose in the system. So if we affect the way that we absorb glucose, then we're going to have potential for hypoglycemia and inaccuracies when patients check their blood sugars. So typically I'll tell a patient to check their blood sugar an hour to 2 hours after they eat. But if they eat either high-fat foods or high-fiber foods, then it'll delay the absorption of glucose. So they might be falsely low when they check their blood sugar an hour to 2 hours after. Because the absorption might not happen, you don't get the spike in their blood sugars until 3 or 4 hours after. So they're actually missing the height of their glucose peak after eating. So typically when I tell them to check their hour to 2 hours after eating, we're kind of hitting them roughly in their peak, or hopefully when they're starting to come down after their glucose peak from eating. And we're getting them on the back side of the curve, kind of. But if you have them eat a high-fat meal or a high-fiber meal, and you're delaying that, then you're catching them at a different point in their sugar spike from the meal that they just ate. It's really popular in pizza. It's really popular with kiddos in pizza. So when you talk about peds patients, this is the worst. This is really, really challenging with peds patients. I have a pizza at a friend's house. They don't normally eat pizza. They take their insulin the way they normally take their insulin, and they have some hypoglycemia because they don't have the glucose in their system yet. And then they eat more, and then they go hyperglycemia later because now you've hit the stuff that you've used to correct, and you've hit the delayed absorption of the original meal that you ate, and they end up with really high blood sugars. The high fat and high fiber tend to make people oscillate between hyper and hypoglycemia more often. because of the false reading and checking their blood sugar, typically. So, what's also different about fiber as opposed to fat is that fiber can block some of the absorption of glucose. So this is where we tell our patients, eat the wheat bread instead of the white bread with huge quotation marks around it. But technically fiber also blocks some of the absorption of glucose. So you can have some hypoglycemia related to that as well, where they would normally have white rice and they eat brown rice. And they give themselves the same amount of insulin, and they might have a lower blood sugar because of lower absorption of glucose. Not only do you typically have a delay, but you also have less absorption, so then it ends up even higher risk of hypoglycemia because of fiber. Typically, we think of high fiber diets as being healthier diets. So this is not to say that we should discourage our patients with diabetes from having a high fiber diet. You should absolutely have a high fiber diet, but it should just be consistent rather than fluctuate. Fiber content in meals is also what helps me determine which meals they can typically eat and which ones I typically recommend to avoid, especially when it comes to fruit. So high fiber fruit is beneficial. Low fiber fruit tends to cause more hyperglycemia. So a perfect example of that, where a lot of patients get confused, is oranges. Oranges are really high in fiber. So an orange for a patient with diabetes is a really good snack. It's really high in fiber. So it blocks some of the absorption of the glucose, of the fructose that's normally in the orange. So you don't get a spike that you would get with, say, watermelon, which has hardly no fiber in it. And it's delicious, so maybe I just eat more watermelon. But in general, watermelons don't have a lot of fiber. You get huge spikes in sugar from the watermelon, but in orange you don't. Patients get confused with this though, because they say I can't eat oranges because they can't have orange juice. But orange juice, you take oranges and you squish them, and you take out all the fiber, just blocking the absorption of sugar. And you have like 6 oranges in a glass of orange juice instead of 1 orange in a glass of orange juice. That's a really good counseling point for patients. And I've seen this really starting to happen in the community setting, where pharmacists walk diabetes patients through grocery stores and do diabetes education. That's one of the highlights for a pharmacist, is to show patients the fruit section and say, pick this instead of that. Pick your orange, don't pick your orange juice. Pick your orange, don't pick your watermelon. Okay? Questions about fat or fiber before we move on to alcohol? Alcohol is a little wonky of a subject. All right, alcohol, we have a risk for hypoglycemia, which should seem counterintuitive. So Athens, why do you think alcohol and hypoglycemia seems counterintuitive? What is alcohol full of?
Sugar.
Sugar. Yeah, I slipped. You hear me? I slipped a little bit. So alcohol is full of sugar. So if alcohol is full of sugar, why do you think you would get hypoglycemia with alcohol? You're giving them sugar, right? Or patients drinking sugar, they get hypoglycemia. Why?
Overproduction of insulin.
No, that's a really good guess, actually. That's a very good guess, but no. Where's alcohol processed?
Liver.
The liver.
Yeah, in the liver, right? Alcohol is processed in the liver. What does the liver produce? it, Drew. Say it, Drew.
I said glucagon, but that's not right.
He said glucagon, but that's not right. Similar though. Similar to glucagon. Okay, close enough. Glucose in general. Okay. Close enough. Close enough. Close enough. It starts with a G. Good enough. Yeah. So your liver has a pretty constant production of glucose. Okay? So if your liver has a pretty constant production of glucose, and we inhibit the liver, then you're no longer producing your endogenous glucose. And if you don't produce your endogenous glucose, then you're at risk for hypoglycemia. Where do you make insulin?
Pancreas.
In your pancreas, right? Does alcohol affect your pancreas? No, not really. Probably does over time because of all the other effects, but doesn't directly necessarily affect your pancreas. So you do have normal insulin production, even in patients who are drinking alcohol. Or not to a clinically significant degree where I'd worry about it. But you do have hepatic impairment. Hepatic impairment leads to hypoglycemia.
So this is even like acutely, we're just like, I mean, how much is that? It was like one drink, or how does it differ over long term versus one not a good drinking versus one drink?
Yep. So dose dependent. So the more alcohol you have, the more inhibition you're going to have of your liver. So the more alcohol, the more risk for hypoglycemia. Good question. Yeah, definitely dose dependent, because you're dose dependently having effects on the liver. So the more you drink, the more you affect the liver. So we really worry about this. Perfect question, Casey, because you really worry about it in binge drinkers. Your bingers. For chronic alcohol, it's probably, it's still an issue, but maybe slightly less of an issue because you have continual hepatic impairment. So you have continual hepatic impairment. It's relatively level. So as long as they drink about the same amount all the time, you have a pretty consistent impairment of the liver. Then you're dosing your diabetes meds to that liver impairment. So this is more about, I worry about it more in binge drinkers. Okay. All right. So then we think about diabetes and diseases. So when we think about diseases, we think about steroids and any conditions where we need steroids. So we think about COPD, asthma exacerbations, needing steroids. We think about the risk for infection, stress. All those can lead to increases in blood sugar. So steroids, infection, stress leads to increase in blood sugar. And then hypotension can be confused with hypoglycemia. So that dizziness associated with hypotension, you can get confused with the dizziness associated with hypoglycemia. So it's really important that patients check their pressure and their sugar at the same time to figure out what's that dizziness caused by. All right, let's move on to hypertension. All right, sorry for the coughing. All right, hypertension, we're going to touch on ACE, ARB, and renal impairment. So ACE, ARB work on afferent or efferent material. I got scared looking Savannah. Did I have scared looks everywhere else? Athens, tell me where ACE inhibitors work. They work on afferent or efferent with an A or an E. It's a 50-50 shot. Ashley, go for it. You got a 50-50 shot. Oh, I didn't hear it. Try it again. Go ahead, Ash. Okay, good. E. E variant. Very good. With an E. Because ACE has an E on it. So E variant. It does have an A. I was getting to that. Hold on. I was getting there. don't get ahead of me. NSAIDs have an A and they don't have an E. You get it? Afferent NSAIDs. Jeez, you stole my thunder. Afferent NSAIDs A, afferent. Afferent is before you get to the kidney. Efferent is after you get to the kidney. So if you stop blood flow and you inhibit blood flow before you get to the kidney and after you get to the kidney, then there's no blood going to the kidney, and then your kidney gets mad. Serum creatinine goes up. Everybody freaks out. You don't do ACE inhibitors with NSAIDs. If you can avoid it. Okay? My kidney lesson for today. Alright. ACE inhibitors in lithium toxicity. Same effect. You have some effect in. Go for it.
Is it about chronic use of ACE and ARBs and NSAIDs, or should we be telling patients like never use it for ACE and ARBs for the most part?
Yeah, so I don't know which dose of an NSAID is going to cause injury, so I say never to use because it can be acute. It doesn't have to be chronic, it can be an acute use. Typically that's dose dependent too, so the more NSAIDs you use, the more likelihood that you're going to do damage. So I don't recommend them at all. And I tell my patients who are on ACE inhibitors, I tell them to use acetaminophen instead, as long as their liver function is appropriate. Good question though. Yeah, so I avoid always. Technically, smaller doses, you're at probably less risk, but I just say avoid altogether. NSAIDs we have the risk of exacerbating hypertension anyway, so I typically say avoid NSAIDs and hypertension in general, but especially in combination with ACE-ARBs. Alright, ACE-ARBs have an effect on kidneys. Lithium is cleared to the kidneys. Lithium is a narrow therapeutic drug. Augusta, tell me what's a narrow therapeutic drug?
Small dosing windows.
Augusta, what does that mean?
There's-
It has a narrow therapeutic window, so you could easily give too high or too low of a dose.
Good, exactly. So lithium, we're very specific, right? We get lithium levels, we have specific dosing for lithium, and it's very small window in which we have an appropriate dose. So we have a small window between benefit and risk. And so lithium toxicity is the risk that we have too high lithium levels. If you block the elimination of lithium through the kidneys with an ACE inhibitor, then you can have toxic effects of lithium. What does lithium toxicity look like? Is this something we know? Maybe not. So lithium toxicity typically presents as nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. That whole GI situation, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle weakness, drowsiness, tremor. Okay. So ACE inhibitors and lithium risk for toxicity because it's a narrow therapeutic drug. Drugs that cause hypotension are always at risk for all agents that have hypotension, are antihypertensives. So if you have two drugs together that are causing hypotension, then that's not going to be good for your patient. So tizanidine causes hypotension. So the hypotension related with tizanidine can be exacerbated by antihypertension. If you're starting tizanidine, you just have to do more monitoring of their blood pressure and a warning about the hypotension risk. Nice and straightforward drug interaction. Questions about that? All right. SSRIs tend to lead to hyponatremia. What is hyponatremia? I mean, Savannah, tell me what hyponatremia means.
Low sodium levels.
Low sodium, just salt shaker. I should give you a little hint, right? Low salt levels, low sodium levels, low sodium levels. So thiazide also cause low sodium levels. If you mix the two together, actively you can end up with hyponatremia. This is not a reason I would not do an SSRI. So this is a risk benefit. I just want to throw it out there. I absolutely would do an SSRI and a thiazide together. I would just definitely watch for the risk for hyponatremia. I do this together all the time. I probably recommend this on a daily basis, thiazide and SSRI. Pretty much do it constantly. But just make sure we monitor. All right? So beta blockers and beta agonists. What do we use beta agonists for? Taught y'all this. Y'all should know. When do we use beta agonists? Cody, tell me when we use beta agonists.
In asthma?
In asthma. Very good. So which beta blockers do we use in asthma? Which beta blockers do we use in asthma? In patients who are on beta agonists, which beta blockers do we use for people who are on beta agonists? So for people who have asthma and use beta agonist therapy, which beta blockers?
Cardioselective ones?
Yeah, very good. Cardioselective. So what's an example of a cardioselective beta blocker?
Bisoprolol?
Yeah. Metoprolol, bisoprolol. Not carvedilol. Carvedilol hits everything under the sun. And atenolol, right, is a selective beta blocker. You know what I do to figure out selective beta blockers? I Google it. I'm not allowed to say that because I'm a faculty member. I don't like to mess it up though, so I Google it every time. Because this is an important drug interaction, and it's a life-threatening drug interaction, so I'm never gonna guess. Never. And I don't trust myself enough to remember which one's cardioselective and which one's not, except for the big ones, like carvedilol. I mean, yeah, okay, fine. But all the other ones that I don't use very often, I Google them. Carvedilol, bisoprolol, like I know those ones, I got those memorized, right? But all the other ones that I don't use very often, I Google them. Because I'm not going to commit something to my memory that's life-threatening. This is a life-threatening example. So the answer is I Google it unless it's one of my key ones like carvedilol, metoprolol. Knows you have to know. Okay? So let me make this very clear then. On an exam, I will hold you accountable for knowing between the difference between carvedilol and metoprolol. Okay? So carvedilol, non-selective, metoprolol, selective. I will hold you accountable for that because I do think it's important to memorize that. I will not hold you accountable for any of the other beta blockers. For those two, I'll hold you accountable for. Deal? Deal. Okay. Questions about that? Life-threatening drug interaction. Okay? Also, decreased effect. Just like we have a decreased effect with beta agonists. You can also have a decreased effect, I guess this is reversed, right? Before we were talking about decreased effect of your beta agonist. In this case, so we have a decreased effect of your beta agonist. In other words, your asthma inhaler is not working as well. Versus in this case, your antihypertensive, your clonidine is not working as well. And it's because TCAs, SNRIs, and trazodone probably have some like catecholamine effects that are really not well defined. But we have interactions with our central alpha-adrenergic. So I think this especially with clonidine rebound. So clonidine rebounds, and it can rebound more significantly when you have all these catecholamine interactions going on. So in this case, it's a decreased effect of your antihypertensive, a decreased effect of your clonidine. Your TCAs and your SNRIs work just as well. You have a decrease in your antihypertensive effect of your clonidine. Versus when we talk about the beta agonist, if the beta agonist is not working, your beta agonist is your life-saving therapy, and your beta agonist, your life-saving therapy isn't working. I guess in this case, clonidine could be a life-saving therapy as well, but realize that when we talk about decreased effect, which agent we're talking about decreased effect. Yep. We can have absorption issues. So the ones that, I guess I could have put this technically in hyperlipidemia as well. But any agents that we have issues with absorption, we're going to have absorption issues for all of our antihypertensive agents. So something just to kind of think through. Again, we can separate or just don't use this. Don't use cholestyramine. My take home from this slide. Use as little as possible. Use your blood pressure agent. Don't use your cholestyramine. Just say no. And sometimes caffeine. Sometimes it's rarely it's my agent of choice, but rare. So I avoid it when I can. Oh, no. Okay. When we think about hyperkalemia, think about a lot of our blood pressure agents, so ACE, ARBs, we don't really use aspirin that much anymore, but you do see it in some patients. But it is one that does cause the most drug interaction, especially when it comes to hyperkalemia. So I didn't say it that well. Aspirin is definitely one that is directly associated with your big bold blues that I have highlighted here. So cyclosporin being the key one, and then really anything that contains potassium salts is an issue. And then you have your potassium sparing diuretics, and your non-selective beta blockers, although beta blockers to a less degree as opposed to the other agents. All right, so we'll hold you accountable for the big bold blue. Definitely. Questions about that? All right. Eplerenone and calcium channel blockers tend to have a lot of 3A4 interaction, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but you have big bold blues that are in the 3A4 category. So just as I'm going to hold you accountable for the other agents and 3A4, I'm going to hold you accountable for eplerenone and calcium channel blockers and the big bold blues. Okay. Moving on. Beta blockers also tend to have an interaction with 2D6. This is not something I'm going to name specific agents. You'll notice there are no big bold blues on this slide. But if I had you look it up in an interaction checker, I certainly would. And have you describe to me the interaction? That sounds like a good question. Something we should be able to do. Okay. Of note, there's a lot of antidepressants, psychotropics, that end up going through 2D6. The 2D6 is really popular with psychotropic agents. You'll notice a bunch of them on the list. So beta blockers and psychotropics, that should be like a red flag in your head. Like, let me check it out. Beta blocker with a psychotropic. As they go through 2D6. Alright. Moving on. Food drug interactions. So the biggest one I worry about is high salt diet. What is our recommendation when it comes to salt? What's the most amount of salt that we recommend in patient with hypertension in their diet? Albany, what do you think?
$1,500 milligrams.
Typically do a little bit higher. again? You're fuzzy.
2300?
2,300 is usually what I go with. There are some recommendations out there for 1,500. The most institutions typically recommend more towards 2,300. So it's not wrong to say 1,500. But if I ask you a question, let's give me 2,300. Okay. For all intents and purposes for this lecture, it's 23. We're gonna get to that in a second. The answer is 23. If they have hypertension, the original question was if they have hypertension, what's the maximum recommended sodium intake for their diet? I like to say 2,300 milligrams.
Is it 2,500 for the general population?
I don't really know what the general population does, to tell you the truth. 25, 20, 34, 30 something I've seen before too. I don't know if we have a direct recommendation. We might. I don't know what it is though. It depends on what. Dr. Duke said that in South Georgia it's 5,500. For the general population, let's talk about it. Limit, I guess. I don't know if I've ever thought of a number for general population with this question. If you find it, let me know. Again. Average is 34. I know I was coming up with a 30. Average intake for the general population is 34. Yeah. Typically I say 23. It's nice. Good number. You will see 15. 15's not wrong. It's just difficult for patients. So it's kind of like you push them over the threshold and they don't do anything. You just hold them like they can't have anything. I don't know. So I go to 23. You'll see different recommendations. Quit. All right, we're gonna move on. All right, drug diseases, diseases that cause high blood pressure. There's a bazillion of them. But for us as pharmacists, really understanding drug therapy that leads to hypertension is important. So when we have nasal decongestion, I can't even say that either, decongestant. When we have nasal decongestant, we have some on the market that are put us at more risk than others. So for example, pseudoephedrine is going to give us high risk for blood pressure. So we don't typically recommend it in patients who have hypertension. Hence, it's really important. This is where we are so powerful as community pharmacists. As community pharmacists, when the patient is bringing up their nasal decongestant to the countertop and you are filling their lisinopril, please counsel your patient and do them a service and tell them, no, go pick the other one over there. Okay? For our younger patients, oral contraceptives are also to hypertension. So you have a patient who's already had a family history of hypertension and they're on an oral contraceptive. This is where we can have an intervention for younger patients. Steroids, we talked about increased blood sugars. They also increase blood pressure. Any other good ones there? NSAIDs, we already talked about NSAIDs. Then we talked about psychotropics a little bit and their other risks, but psychotropics also tend to lead to increased blood pressure in general. Likely with that whole catecholamine business. Okay? All right, let's touch on dyslipidemia really quick. One enzyme that we haven't talked about in terms of big bold blue yet is OATP. So OATP tends to be one of our enzymes that a lot of our statins go through. So it's a risk with our statins. I got a little line happy here in my slide. So especially atorvastatin, pravastatin, rosuvastatin. OATP. Okay? Cyclosporin is our big drug in that category. It's the big bold blue. Oh, I missed the big bold blue little thing. It should be a little big bold blue sign in my upper left-hand corner. Note that there's a big bold blue on the slide. There's a big bold blue on the slide. It's cyclosporin. So everybody in your mind, add a big bold blue little thing up in the upper left-hand corner. Okay? go over this, but I'm gonna hold you accountable to this. Here's what I'm gonna hold you accountable, because it's what I see the most often. So if I was taking notes right now, this is what I would write down. Okay. What I would write down is that simvastatin is a 3A4, lovastatin is a 3A4, atorvastatin is a 3A4. So if I was taking notes to myself, and I wanted to get the exam question right, I would write down to myself that simvastatin, lovastatin, and atorvastatin are 3A4 agents. I would write down a note to myself that rosuvastatin is a 2C9 agent. And I would write down a note to myself that pravastatin is not affected by the CYP enzyme. So if I was making notes to myself, and the way that I memorize this is that simvastatin, lovastatin, atorvastatin all go through 3A4. They have huge drug interactions. Simvastatin, lovastatin, atorvastatin all have lots of drug interactions because they go through 3A4. And rosuvastatin has drug interactions with 2C9, and pravastatin does not use the CYP enzyme. Okay? Questions about today? All right. Get into your group, get out your phones, and we're going to Kahoot. I think log in as a team, your team,
Can you do that?
therapy team, or whatever team. Come up with teams. Your teams you normally use for one per team.
Let's just make an aggressive team.
Yeah.
She might trace it back.
If I were a really busy faculty member and I had to come up with test questions and I had already developed 10 questions in a Kahoot, I'm just saying.
Am I doing what? Oh, sure.
How many groups do y'all have? 26. You have 26 groups? No. Why is there 31? We're gonna get our own road. I love it. I hope they win. I'm not biased. All right, 32. We're clearly not in our group, so that's fine. Okay, we're gonna go. 10 questions. Here we go. Rapid fire.
They told me to.
Which of the following will a patient experiencing hypoglycemia feel if on a beta blocker?
Sweating.
Is it shaking, thirst, increased heart rate, or sweating?
Was it sweating? Yeah. Okay. What?
Survey says sweating. Very good.
13th place. How? Like, I thought I answered that.
Group 26. What?
What?
Heated console interacts with. Is it pioglitazone, glipizide, metformin, or insulin?
I don't know. I put red.
If we think about the enzymes, what enzymes will go through? It goes on. What enzyme does ketoconazole go through? Which enzyme is ketoconazole? Great, all right. I'm gonna go back to our diabetes slide. We go back to our slide and we think about ketoconazole.
What was the answer?
Ketoconazole is very important.
So you said you're correct.
The team coming on up.
Oh.
All right. When contrast diet is given with metformin, what adverse effects is possible? Is it hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, acute kidney injury, or acute liver failure?
Your toe falls off.
Acute kidney injury, really good, 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 good. So, what's our risk with acute kidney injury? Oh, we've been together for like 3 weeks now. Can you use microphones? No. Lactic acidosis, Sam. Lactic acidosis. You can't use the microphone down right now. All right, moving forward.
She's not in here.
The teams, y'all. Big Bull Blue, I see you. I see you, Big Bull Blue. Okay, moving forward. Which of the following can cause delayed hypoglycemia? Is it alcohol, high fat, high fiber?
Wait, isn't it?
Oh, you know what, guys? I think I also forgot to mention in some of them, there's multiple
Yeah.
right answers.
So why did
Sorry. I don't think I should, some of them I just left all the above.
Oh yeah, because your pancreas is still
Hold up. We have a wide variety. So let's talk about the answer. Somebody who picked high fiber, why did you say high fiber? Somebody in Athens who picked high fiber, why did you pick high fiber? Okay, Drew, explain why. Right now.
Don't the others cause
Everyone was thinking hyperglycemia instead of hypoglycemia, like elevated blood sugar levels.
Yeah. So what's the right answer? Alcohol is indeed the right answer, right? So if you have high fat and high fiber, then you have delayed absorption, you have delayed hyperglycemia. Alcohol, you have delayed hypoglycemia.
Okay, that would be.
Right? It takes a while for the alcohol to affect the liver. It's not like it happens instantly. It does happen, but you have hypoglycemia, delayed hypoglycemia. I guess I didn't highlight that earlier, but technically it is a delayed hypoglycemia. It's not like you just drink alcohol, you shoot out the crash. It takes a little bit before the liver is clear
The
enough
net
to
sales
production.
were 2 million. So I was
Okay.
like, well, if they did 2 million with 30,000, I get X over 50,000.
All right, team 18, Big Blue Blue, the team 7, coming on up. All right, which organ is affected when ACE inhibitors and NSAIDs are given together? The liver, kidney, heart,
Their
lung.
salaries going.
Y'all have to go through this. Y'all have to think about this.
You're not very good at that.
Very good. Did anybody who put lungs or liver, was that like a misstroke or do we not understand?
Lungs was a misstroke by Aubrey Slaughter.
At least give it.
They just
answers.
That's bad. Okay, I screwed it up.
Yeah, you did.
No, you have to protect the sign. You can pick multiple. Oh, you can't. You guys will pick one of the three. Okay, fine. Well, that's my lack of technology right there.
We're now on 26 first, y'all.
Multiple corrections. Very good. So, Dominic, let's decided my topic is not lithium toxicity. That's viral toxicity for this bug that I got. Okay? Good. You guys did good on that. Which beta blocker should be avoided in patients with asthma? Is it metoprolol, atenolol, or Ritalol? Just to give you a hint, I told you I'm going to hold you accountable to 2 beta blockers. Both of those 2 beta blockers are on this slide. So if I had to pick one of the two, I'd pick one of the 2, right? So the answer is probably not one of the other 2. Just tossing that out there. Oh, that was a metoprolol.
Oh, I didn't answer
So maybe it was Audrey. Aubrey.
It wasn't, we got it right this time.
Way to bring the team up. Can I assume that that's a misstroke?
That was not
Yeah?
me.
Okay, so let's memorize our beta blockers, right? For beta wall versus metoprolol.
So we have
Are you guys gonna say something? Didn't want to admit it, but hopefully it's a misstroke. Then we're gonna memorize our beta blockers and selectivity. The only ones that I'm gonna hold you accountable, the only ones that I hold myself accountable to, are metoprolol and Ritalol. Okay? Move it on. If I wasn't doubting, I would have read the question, but did. Which of the following is contraindicated? Well, with the drug that I hate saying more than any other drug in the whole entire world, Algiers. Oh my God, absolutely. We had a few groups choose NSAIDs and tacrolimus.
Do not come
Was this a misstroke or this is a?
Wait, did you do it again? No, that got it right.
This is a needed clarification.
We had a mixture.